There's been a lot of times in life where it doesn't seem, or you sort of look back on your life and you think, I'm not one person. Like, there are multiple me's in me.
Welcome. I'm Todd Boss. In this podcast, I help strangers discover the poetry in their most intimate stories.
It's possible that I'm, both the best person and the worst person that's ever lived.
In this episode,
and that's not a contradiction.
John.
Greetings and salutations.
Is that your standard greeting?
Yes.
I love that.
We're on Zoom, so I can see John. He's 43 with a cap on his head, glasses on his nose, and a long Amish beard that traces only the very outermost perimeter of his face. Kind of a happy gnome kind of a guy.
So where are you?
I am in Olympia, Washington, and I am in my detached office.
He's surrounded by bookshelves on both sides and towering high above him, maybe 400 or 500 of them.
I've got the books that I love that I go to quite a bit right here. Everything from like Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Flannery O'Connor, Dostoevsky.
Throughout the course of our interviews, I noticed John quotes a lot from things he's read, leaning back in his chair and glancing at the books behind him as if nodding to his friends.
And then I've got a poetry section over here, and there's theology, philosophy, and then a few little art supplies. I've tried to not clutter my new office the way that my old one was, but we'll see how long that lasts.
Right. Things tend to collect.
Yes.
I like John. He's the kind of aging hipster you'd want around a campfire on a clear night when you can see the stars. He's got the inquisitive energy of a lifelong learner, but he didn't reach out to me to talk about books.
I thought this thing that's happened to me is a story that I still have yet to make full sense of. I don't think it's ever an event that I'll be able to put my arms fully around. I think sometime in my life, I thought I would get my arms around it. That's why I did call you, because I thought this could be an interesting opportunity to tell the story about what my wife and I and my 3 daughters at the time went through. So the long and the short of it is, my wife and I were living in Shelton, and we were getting ready for Christmas. This is 2012. My wife is crocheting all kinds of, things for presents for our 3 daughters. And Christmas Eve rolls around. We were supposed to go over to my mom's house. She starts to get this pain in her back. She's pacing back and forth, making involuntary head movements like she was having pain that I knew was at the level of like childbirth kind of pain. It became obvious that like she wasn't going to go to my mom's house. We drop off the girls at my in-laws. I take Christy to the emergency room, and the ER doctor came in and said, it's probably kidney stones. We can do a CT scan, but it's probably kidney stones. It's just up to you. Well, my wife is thinking, we're not doing the CT scan because it's expensive and we're living on one income. So she's thinking money. And I usually think money too, but this time I was like, no, I think we should get the CT scan. There's a big sign on the wall that says, CT results will not be read within an hour. So don't even ask. 10 minutes after the CT scan, the ER doctor comes in. So you have a 6.5-inch tumor on your pancreas. It's likely cancerous. You need to see a surgeon right away. Said it just like that. And we were like, come again? Like, I don't even have anywhere to put that kind of news. That was just one of those things you hear about people getting told. So we said, like, what about the pain and stuff? And he's like, well, there's alcohol. I mean, really, he was just kind of like, I don't know what to tell you. If you had a broken arm, I could help you, but this is way outside of my specialty.
The girls ended up spending the night at their grandparents' house. John and Christy got home at about 3 a.m.
And I started getting online and doing research, and I'm like, my wife is going to die. I didn't say any of that out loud.
You just went to this panic place.
Well, I'm really good in emergency situations. I had a friend almost cut his fingers off, and it's like, I was just calm, wrap your fingers up, get you to the ER. Like, I looked like I was great. But then I had nightmares for, weeks after that, right? Like I'm a total train wreck, but like in the moment, I'm like, this has to be done right now. And I'm going to do this.
So you're at the computer and you're thinking, my wife's going to die of cancer.
So I start Googling stuff, and Virginia Mason, a hospital in Seattle, starts showing up on the searches. I start going to like Google Scholar, and I start going to, like studies and like reading actual like surgery reports. And, I'm like staying up till 3-4 in the morning every night trying to figure this thing out. And I get a pretty good sense of like what all this means, as much as I thought I could, as my way of trying to like control the situation. I think now in retrospect, it's like, I want to be able to feel like I know what to do.
Christy had a different reaction.
My wife went the other direction, and that is, I'm going to remain hopeful about this. So I don't want to know numbers. I don't want to know percentages. I just need to know like what I need to do to get better. And it's difficult to decouple all of this from where my wife and I were spiritually. I had become very closed and intellectualized in my heart. Only in retrospect that I look back and recognize how dark of a place I was at. I had lost, to a certain degree, the ability to hope.
John ended up making the call to Virginia Mason.
I said, hey, the folks down in Thurston County at the surgeon place gave us the runaround a little bit. I think my wife's going to die, and I heard you guys are the best. Seattle was like, we're so sorry, come up here. So we go see two of the best guys that you can possibly see, guys and gals. And they did the CT scan again. They looked at everything that it was. And this tumor was pushing on her stomach, on her colon, on the aorta that runs up back by your spine, on her left kidney, on a couple other things. So like the options when we got there were like, hey, so we could open her up and the tumor could just slide out. It's not attached to anything. And we'll sew you back up and we'll say, way to go. Or we could open you up. We could have to do a bypass on your colon, take out part of your stomach, remove your left kidney, take your adrenal gland and your spleen, do a bypass on the aorta, which only like 3 or 4 hospitals in the US do it. Or it's going to be so attached to stuff that we're going to sew you back up and talk about palliative care and end of life care kind of stuff.
The Seattle hospital was able to get Christy in 12 days later, which was pretty impressive given that it was just after Christmas and right before New Year's.
They said the surgery is probably going to be 12 hours. You're probably going to be in the hospital 10 days. It's going to be a long road to recovery, but it could be longer, based on all that. So we go home kind of like my wife is feeling sort of hopeful and scared, and I'm just numb, like dead on the inside. And I had this weird thing come up in me where it's like, I'm excited that we're at one of the best places to do the surgery. Like, this is so wonderful that we live near Seattle. And also, like, what level of human experimentation did it get for us to be able to just even say to another person, I'm going to cut you open and touch all the things on the inside of you and put it back together, and it's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
miraculous.
Like, my dark way of thinking went to like the Japanese camps that they ran in their prison experiments, or the Nazi experiment camp. Like, I'm like, all of this goodness is on the back of so much evil and suffering. In a strange way, I felt like I had kind of I've never articulated it this way, but this is exactly what it was. I felt like I had this Gnostic, understanding, like this hidden wisdom, this hidden knowledge that very few other people really knew the severity of the situation. So I was walking around with this, like, I had read a lot about all of the things that could happen and what it might be and percentages of success and this and that. I hadn't prayed in a long time. I was convinced that, well, if God knows what I'm thinking before I even say it out loud, why would I say anything out loud? I thought I was pretty clever. And I thought that that God needed me to say something in order for him to do something, when really maybe me saying something is more about what I need and not what he, like
you had deconstructed praying. Right?
Yep. Yeah. Yes. Right. And like, I had somebody say, hey, you should probably like go away and pray about some of this, and I was like, sure, whatever. I was like, what am I going to say? Like literally, what am I going to say?
What am I going to say that God doesn't already, right?
Yeah. And like, I'm not willing to make the move that like, hey, this is your fault. Because it's like, who am I to say that? That means that I have some kind of crazy knowledge about the way the world should work. And it's like, I'm not willing to say that, but I am willing to say the best I can do is be quiet, which is not what I'm inclined to do about anything.
I don't share John's faith tradition, but I'm beginning to see that if I'm going to write a poem that speaks to John's heart, I'm going to have to take his faith tradition seriously.
So I go to a little coffee shop in Hoodsport, Washington, before the surgery. This is like a week before the surgery. And I'm sitting there with a cup of coffee and I'm just like, what the hell am I supposed to say? And I don't know if this has happened to you before, but where lines of things that you have read before will just come sort of blazing into the forefront of your mind. Things that you didn't intentionally recall, but they are there. And I had that happen. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book of Job, but there's a line right when God starts to talk to Job where he says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? And there's just a whole series of those. Where were you? Where were you when the doe gave birth to the fawn? And so the lines that came in front of my mind were actually, because we're by the saltwater on Hood Canal right there. And it was, did you tell the tide to go out this morning? Did you tell the tide, or are you going to tell the tide to come back in? Like, did you tell the moon to come out last night? And what's interesting about that is that I just thought, well, of course I didn't. Like, that's not my question. At least at the time I thought that's not my question. My question isn't whether or not you are in control. The question is, and through 10 years of reflection, it's like, no, the question is, am I in control? And I suppose that's a question I'm still wrestling with. Or to what extent is your control dependent on my control?
Maybe you know someone like John, constantly scrutinizing his own life, intellectualizing, researching, floating theories, consulting others. It's dizzying on some level, this seemingly endless questing, but it's invigorating too, how ready and facile he is with self-reflection.
The surgery was a full 12 hours. The doctor spent like 2 hours just peeling the tumor off the kidney. They didn't have to do any of the bypasses. They didn't have to take out her kidney. They did have to take her spleen out and her adrenal gland on the kidney. And they sewed her back up. And the first few days were really horrible.
The doctors gave Christy an epidural for the pain on her first night after surgery, but it didn't work.
And we still didn't know whether or not like the cancer was spread through her pancreas. They had to remove 3/4 of her pancreas. So they weren't sure if she'd be diabetic. But then Dr. Picosi, so this is now 6 days later, Dr. Picosi comes walking down the hallway, the pancreatic specialist. He's like the reason why Virginia Mason is really well known, or part of it. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, it's like Dr. Death. And he walks in and he just says, well, there was cancer in the tumor. It was on the inside of the tumor, but it hadn't spread to everything. You're going to be okay. If you're going to have pancreatic cancer, this is the kind to have. And I actually haven't talked about this much. I just walked out of the room. We had some friends in the room with us. I just walked out of the room and I walked around the hallway and I like collapsed on the ground and was like heaving, crying. And I don't know for how long. I mean, I haven't had that happen very often.
Yeah.
Maybe once when I was little, when my parents were getting a divorce. I had doctors stop and ask me if I was okay. And I said, yes and no. And I don't even know how long it was, but I came back in the room and, I just hugged my wife. I didn't know what it meant. Like, I didn't know what that meant for the future now. I hadn't realized how much I had prepared myself for her to die and that she wasn't going to die now from that.
Right.
It took my wife months of recovery. She has this massive scar on her stomach, and she's okay. And we're actually going to be going to our 10-year checkup after Thanksgiving. And we've had 3 babies since then. I mean, like, she really is okay.
You sound like you're still getting used to the idea.
My mom's had cancer, and I didn't realize when you go in for checkups after you've had cancer, the sort of fear that creates. And that kind of goes back to sort of the anger that I still, and I say anger in the classical sense, like I'm perceiving that there's an injustice. And so there's the movement in my heart towards like wanting some sort of resolution to this injustice that like we're keeping people alive, but are they alive? You know? And I'm not talking about like euthanizing people in the least bit, but what I'm saying is that like this sort of perpetual checking up on you to make sure that your body's functional. And then if your body's not functional, we're going to do all these crazy things to keep you alive because the highest good is your bodily life. And it's like, I just reject that outright, that your bodily good is your highest good. But on the same hand, your bodily good is a profound good. Like, right? Like you can't just say it's not, like you can't go the way of the Stoics and say it doesn't matter, because that's the only way we know how to experience the world is through our bodies. So like, anyway.
Right. Do you think it affects Christy as much as it affects you to go to these?
Yeah, I think she's probably better at dealing with it. Like, I think she's just really honest about it. She's honest about where she's at with it. Like, hey, like this is coming up. And then we have some kind of conversation. She's like, yeah, this is like, you know, and she'll cry in a way that is, I think, really healthy. And for me, it's kind of like, I have to kind of fight off the trying to go loaded for bear, you know, because I legitimately do think worst case scenarios around most things. Like if there's something big happening, I think contingency plans for worst case scenarios.
Well, it sounds like that's at the heart of a lot of this. You know, it seems like that's what you did at the outset. You know, when it was first the diagnosis, and you sort of left yourself unprepared for the possibility that you didn't have to. It wasn't all going to fall apart.
100%. I had zero contingency plans for what's going to happen if she's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of come up a few times over the last 10 years that in my heart, every now and then, like and I think it's kind of the other side of the card when I say that when I finally told her, like, I thought you were going to die, the other side of the card is like, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
You know,
that you're not going to die.
Right. From this at this moment, you know?
Yeah. You hadn't planned for that. It seems silly to say because you don't have to really plan for everything being normal, do you?
No. No.
And yet you feel that dislocation somehow in the.
Yes. Yeah. I suppose it's been a theme, I guess, in what we've been talking about through this whole thing of like me controlling, me understanding, me knowing what the future is going to hold, me trying to manipulate it. And like, that's exhausting. And I just can't do that. You know, it's ultimately God who takes the first step and the second step and the third step towards me, not the other way around. This kind of bootstrapping Protestant notion that like, hey, you know, I'm going to just figure it out. Yeah. Good luck with that.
John says he's learned that humility is not false self-flagellation or insisting you're the least person in the room. Rather, it's an honest assessment of yourself. He realizes that sometimes it's okay not to be okay, to stay down, to receive comfort, to surrender.
6 or 7 years ago, I had this ferocious hunger to talk to God that I hadn't before in the past. And a big part of that was going to confession, you know, bringing a lot of these fears to confession as a way to be healed.
Virginia Woolf said, some people go to priests, others to poetry.
I attempt to go to confession as often as possible because that sort of natural impulse of us that we have to tell somebody what's going on deep in our hearts is so necessary, and it can be just like the most powerful gift.
I don't pretend to be a shaman or healer or therapist or really any kind of guru or guide, but isn't there a way in which this podcast is a kind of confessional? Even on our shared screen, I sit in one compartment, John sits alongside me in the next. We're both here because we want to witness and transform this intimacy into some kind of grace. I'm grateful he's bringing the reverence he's learned in his religious practice to this secular space. I reconnect with John a day before Thanksgiving to give him the poem I've written.
I know you're eager to see it, right? I'm eager to share it with you.
But first I want to know how Christy's 10-year checkup went.
Yeah. So today was the day that we drove up to one of their remote clinics. She did the CT scan and got blood work, and then we just drove home. So then next week we'll do a teletherapy appointment to look at the results. None of it is dramatic. I would say that everybody's just kind of tired. Both, we're looking forward to just kind of putting it behind us,
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, I'll be sending good thoughts your way.
Thank you.
All right. Well, are you ready?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm ready.
How do you be ready for something like this?
Right. Yeah. It's like,
The poem you're about to hear is written in the style of Tony Hoagland, which is to say that it seems to take place at a party. Like John's head, this party is overpopulated with intellectuals and writers. Some of his favorites and mine are there. Thomas Merton, Flannery O'Connor, Cormac McCarthy, Raymond Carver, their voices almost overlapping. But because I wanted the poem not just to reflect John back to himself, but also to shake him out of his head, letting him, as he says, put it all behind him and recognize the enormous gift of life he and Christy have been given every day, right here, right now, I ended the poem with an opportunity for John to laugh at those voices and to embrace the simple spirit of Thanksgiving.
all right, it's open.
All right. The title's Thanksgiving.
Inevitably, you find out you are lost, really lost, blind, really blind, stupid, really stupid, dry, really dry, hungry, really hungry, and you go on from there, says Tony. Flan says, where you came from is gone, where you thought you were going was never there, and where you are is no good unless you can get away from it. Tom says, I tried following God, but following somebody who's everywhere and nowhere at once is just humiliating. Milo stops kissing the stem of his pipe long enough to say, a few of me followed God, a few went crazy, a few got day jobs, and at least one of me is upstairs right now agonizing over the tense of a verb. A bird trapped in a barn, says Cormac from the couch where we thought he'd been asleep, passes through the slats of daylight, bird by bird. I just want to be loved, says Ray. Is that lost, blind, stupid, and hungry enough for you, screwballs? And now Christy's rounding the corner with a tray of fresh drinks. Shut up, she says, all of you, and pay attention. You don't get too many more sunsets like this one.
That's beautiful. Like really beautiful.
To read this poem again, as well as John's response to it, and to see photos of Christy and John's whole family, plus a stack of John's favorite books, go to our website, poeminthat.com.
I'm organizing my thoughts about this because
This episode is dedicated to the researchers, surgeons, and palliative and supportive caregivers who engage every day with cancer, its victims, and its survivors.
It's really, really wonderful. I'm just really grateful.
Thanksgiving quotes most extensively from a Tony Hoagland poem called Among the Intellectuals, from his posthumous collection Turn Up the Ocean, published by Graywolf Press. If you liked Thanksgiving, you'll love Tony Hoagland's poems. the cause of his early death at 64 was pancreatic cancer.
The only thing I could really say that seems to matter is really like, I'm grateful that you listened.
There's a Poem in That is written and produced by me, Todd Boss, and co-producer Bronwyn Clark, with support from associate producer Hila Plittman. Audio support from Ben O'Brien. Original music by Esh Whitaker.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a privilege, John.
If you like this podcast, share it with others or support us with a donation at poeminThat.com. And as always, if you think there's a poem in your story, tell us why by leaving a message on our Haiku Hawaii listener line at 808-300-0449.
Thank you so much, Todd. I'm going to go inside and share this with my family.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Peace and love. Thank you.
I'm Todd Boss, reminding you that there's a poem in everything if you're paying attention.